Okay.
I know.
Hello and welcome everyone for joining us for an evening with Ryan Jamaal Swain. I'm Rakesh Sithyal, Vice President of the Board of Lambda Literary, and I'm thrilled to be your host tonight for another installment of Lambda Literary Does Pride, a series of readings and discussions with a few of our community's brightest stars. To see our full list of events, visit our website at lambdaliterary.org. Books have always been central to queer culture and identity, which is why I am so proud of the work that Lambda Literary does. Many of you might be familiar with the Lambda Literary Awards, which celebrate the best LGBTQIA+ books of the year. Since 1989, the Lammys have asserted the distinct value and power of queer literature. The Lammys are just one part of our work, however. Lambda Literary also brings LGBTQIA+ books into schools so that kids, especially queer and trans youth, can see themselves reflected in the books they read in school. We also prepare future generations of queer writers by offering the only writing residency in the world exclusively for emerging LGBTQI+ voices. These programs and others are only possible because of financial support from people like you, which is why I ask that you make a donation to Lambda Literary tonight by clicking the donate button at the bottom of your screen. Like many people and organizations, the COVID-19 pandemic has had an enormous impact on us, and this June we need to raise $25,000 to continue our work throughout the year ahead. Please help us ensure that Lambda Literary can continue to respond creatively and powerfully as we move through this tumultuous time. Even giving as little as $10 ensures that we can keep bringing you programs like tonight's in the months and years ahead. You can contribute to our work at any point tonight by clicking the donate button again at the bottom of your screen or visiting lambdaliterary.org. And with that, I will introduce tonight's special guest. Ryan Jamaal Swain is an American actor, writer, and activist who plays the role of Damon Richards-Evangelista in the hit FX television. Yeah, exactly. I'm a fan. Sorry. On the hit FX television series Pose. In 2014, he wrote and starred in A Negro Writer, a one-man show about the life of American writer Langston Hughes. Please join me in welcoming Ryan Jamaal Swain to our event.
Hey guys, how are you? Hey everyone.
So I'll give it a quick overview of the event. So I'm going to disappear for a little bit and Ryan's going to read, which I'm so excited to see. And then we'll be taking questions. And if you see the add a question button at the bottom of your screen as well, if you want to submit one, we'll be collating those. And so after the reading, I'll come back on and we'll have a discussion. So I'm going to toggle my screen off for a second and then re-emerge. So break a leg.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So we're going to be reading Chapter 2 of A Boy's Own Story by Edmund White. When I was 14, the summer before I went to prep school, a year before I met Kevin, I worked for my father. He wanted me to learn the value of $1. I did work, I did learn, and I earned enough to buy a Hustler. The downtown of the city Dad lived in was small, no larger than a few dozen blocks. Every morning, my stepmother drove me into town from our house, the fake Norman castle that stood high and white on a hill above the streaming river valley. We'd go down into town, a rapid descent of several steep plunges into the creeping traffic, the dreams dissolves of black faces, the smell of hot franks filtered through the car's air-conditioned interior, the muted cries of newspaper vendors speaking their own incomprehensible language, the somber look of suited facades edging forward to squeeze out the light. Downtown excited me. So many people, some of them just possibly an invitation to adventure or escape. Now, as a little boy, I thought of our house, the old Tudor one, not this new Norman castle, as a place God had meant us to own. But now I knew in a vague way that its seclusion and ease had been artificial and that it had strenuously excluded the city at the same time we depend on the city for food, money, comfort, help, even pleasure. The Black Maids were the representatives of the city I grew up among. I'd never wanted anything from them, nothing except their love. To win it, or at least to ward off their sighing resentment. I'd learned how to make my own bed and cook my own breakfast, but nothing I could do seemed to make up to them for the terrible loss they'd endured. In my father's office, I worked for a dressograph machine, then something of a novelty with Alice, a woman of 40 who, like a restless zebra tangled in sheets, tossed about all day in her fantasies. in fantasies. She was a chubby but pert woman who wore pearls to cover the pale line across her neck, the scar from some sort of surgical intervention. It was a very thin line, but she could never trust her disguise and ran to the mirror in the ladies' room 6 or 7 times a day to reevaluate the effect. The rest of her energy went into elaborating her fantasies. There was a man on the bus every morning who always stationed himself opposite her and arrogantly undressed her with his dark eyes. Upstairs from her apartment, another man lurked, growling with desire, his eye pressed up to the floor as he listened through an inverted glass for the glissando of a silk slip she might be stepping out of. "Should I put another lock on my door?" she asked. Later, she asked with wide-eyed sweetness, "Should I invite him down for a cup of coffee?" I advised her not to. He might be dangerous. The ferociousness of her need for men made me act younger than usual. Around her, I took refuge in being a boy, not a man. Her speculations would cause her to sigh, drink water, and return to the mirror. My stepmother said she considered this woman to be a ninny. My family and their friends almost never characterized people we actually knew, certainly not dismissively. I felt a gleeful shame in thinking of my colleague as a ninny. Sometimes I'd laugh out loud when the word popped into my head. I found it both exciting and alarming to feel superior to a grown-up. Something about our work simulated thoughts of sex in us. Our tasks, feeding envelopes into a trough, stamping them with addresses, stuffing them with brochures, later sealing them and running them through the postage meter, required just enough attention to prevent connected conversation, but not so much as to absorb us. We were left with the amoeboid desires that split or merged as we stacked and folded, as we tossed and turned. "When he looks at me," Alice said, "I know he wants to hurt me." And she said that. Her sweet, chubby face looked as though it was emerging out of a cloud. Once, I read about a woman patient in psychoanalysis who referred to her essential identity as her prettiness. My companion, gray-eyed, her wrist braceleted in firm, healthy fat, hair swept into a brioche purse by a fork of a comb. Her expression confused and sweet as she floated free of the cloud. She surrounded and kept safe her own prettiness, as though it was a passive, intelligent child, and she, the mother, dazed by the sweeping lights of the world. She was both afraid and serene, afraid of being noticed and more afraid of being ignored, thrillingly afraid of the sounds outside her bedroom window, but also serene in her conviction that this whole bewildering opera was being staged in order to penetrate the fire and get to her prettiness. She really was pretty. Perhaps I haven't made that clear. A sad blur of a smile, soft gray eyes, a defenseless availability. She was also crafty, or maybe willfully blind in the way she concealed from herself her own sexual ambitions. Becoming my father's employee clarified my relationship with him. It placed him at an exact distance from me that could be measured by money. The divorce agreement had spelled out what he owed my mother, my sister, and me. But even so, whenever my mother put us kids on the train to go visit him, one weekend out of every month or for long periods every summer, she invariably told us, "Be nice to your father or he'll cut us off." And later, when my sister was graduating from college, he presented her with the life bill, the itemized expenses he'd incurred in raising her over 21 years, a huge sum that was intended to discourage her from thoughtlessly spawning children of her own. Since Dad slept all day, he seldom put in an appearance at the office before closing time. When he'd arrive fresh and rested, smelling of witch hazel and scattered reluctant smiles and nods to the assembly as he made his way through us and stepped up to his own desk in a large room walled off from us by soundproof glass. "My, what a fine man your father is. A real gentleman," my colleague would sigh. "And to think your stepmother might met him when she was his secretary? Some women have all the luck." We sat in rows with our backs to him. He played the role of the conscious above and behind us, a force that troubled us as we filed out our soon after his arrival at the end of the workday. Had we stayed late enough? Done enough? My stepmother usually kept my father company until midnight. Then she and I would drive back to the country and go to bed. Sometimes my father followed us in his own car and continued his desk work at home. Or sometimes he'd stay downtown till dawn. Late at night, that's when he goes out to meet other women. I once overheard my real mother tell my sister, he was never faithful. There was always another woman the whole 22 years we were married. He takes them to those little flea bag hotels downtown. I know. This hint of mystery about a man so cold and methodical fascinated me, as though he, the rounded brown geode, if only cracked open, would nip at the sky with interlocking crystal teeth, the quartz teeth of passion. Before the midnight drive back home, I was sometimes permitted to go out to dinner by myself. Sometimes I also took in a movie. I remember going to one that promised to be an actual views of the orgies at Bergstuen, but it turned out to be just Eva Braun's home movies, for her comforting warm smiles on pets and children. A man who smelled of Vitalis sat beside me and squeezed my thigh with his hand. I had my own spending money and my own free time. I hypothesized a lover who'd take me away. He'd climb the fir tree outside my window, step into my room, and gather me into his arms. What he said or looked like remained indistinct. Just a cherishing wraith enveloped me, whose face glowed more and more brightly. His delay in coming went on so long that soon I passed from anticipation to nostalgia. One night, I sat at my window and stared at the moon, toasting it with a champagne glass filled with grape juice. I knew the moon's cold, immense light was falling on him as well, far away and just as lonely in a distant room. I expected him to be able to define my existence and my needs, to intuit that in this darkened room in this country house, a 14-year-old was waiting for him. Sometimes now, when I pass dozing suburban houses, I wonder behind what window a boy waits for me. And after a while, I realize I wouldn't mind him till years later. I wrote him a sonnet that began, "Because I loved you before I knew you." The idea, I think, was that I'd never quarrel with him, nor ever rate his devotion cheap. I had had to wait too long. I'd waited so long, I was almost angry, certainly vengeful. And my father's house was a sober place. The stylist, polished furniture was piled high, and the pantry, some supplies were laid in. In the fullness of break front drawers, gold flatware and silver tea things remained for 6 months at a time in mauve flannel bags that could not ward off a tarnished bread out of the very air. No one talked much. There was a little laughter, except when my stepmother was on the phone with one of her social friends. Although my father hated most people, he had wanted my stepmother to take her place in society, and she had. She'd become at once proper and frivolous, innocent and amusing, high-spirited and reserved, the combination of wacky girl and prim matron her world so admired. I learned my part less well. I feared the sons of her friends and made shadows among the Debs. I played the piano without even improving. So practice would have meant an acceptance of more delay, whereas I wanted instant success. The throb of plump fans in the dark audience, the glare of diamonded necks and ears in the curve of lodges. What I had instead was the ache of waiting and the fear I wasn't worthy. Before dressing, I'd stand naked before the closet mirror and wonder if my body was worthy. I could still picture that pale skin stretch over ribs, the thin, hairless arms and sturdier legs, the puzzled, searching face, and the slow lapping of disgust and longing. The disgust was hot, penetrating. Nobody would want me because I was a sissy and I had mold between my shoulder blades. That longing was cooler, less substantial, more the spray of a wave than the wave itself. Perhaps the eyes were engaging. There was something about the smile. If not lovable as a boy, then maybe as a girl. I wrapped the towel into a turban on my head, or perhaps need itself was charming. Or could be. Maybe my need could make me as appealing as Alice, the woman who worked the addressograph machine with me. I was always reading and often reading, but both were passionately abstract and activities. Early on, I had recognized that books pictured another life, one quite foreign to mine, in which people circled one another waringly and with exquisite courtesy until an individual or a couple erupted and flew out of the salon, spangling the night with fire. I had somehow stumbled on Ibsen, and that's how he struck me. Oblique social chatter followed by a heroic death in a slow snowslide or on the steeple of a church. I wondered how these scenes could be staged. Oddly enough, the realism of the last century seemed to me tingingly far-fetched. Vows, betrayals, flights, sacrifices, suicides. I saw literature as a fantasy, no less absorbing for all its irrelevance, a parallel life, as dreams shadowed waking but never intersected it. I thought that to write of my own experiences would require a translation out of the crude patois of actual slow suffering, meaning, mean scattered thoughts and transfusion slow boredom, into the tidy couplets of brisk, beautiful sentiment, a way of at once elevating and lending momentum to what I felt. At the same time, I was drawn to, what if I could write about my life exactly as it was? What if I could show it in all its deep density and tedium and its concealed passion, never divined or expressed the dull brown gield that eats at itself with quartz teeth? The library downtown had been built as an opera house in the last century. Even in grade school, I had haunted the library, which was in the same block as my father's office. The library looked up like a roomy eye at the pitch skylight over which pigeons whirled, their bodies a shudder gray haze, until one bird settled and its pacing black feet became as precise as cuneiform. The light seeped down to the stacks that were arranged in a horseshoe of tiers. The former family balcony, the dress circle, the boxes on down to the orchestra, still gently raked by now cleared of stalls and furnished with massive oak cards, files, and oak reading tables where unshaved old men read newspapers under gooseneck lamps and rearranged rags and paper sacks. The original stage had been demolished, but cleats on the wall showed where ropes had once been secured. The railing around the various balconies still described crude arabesques in bronze gone green, but the old floors of the balconies had been replaced by rectangular slabs of smoked glass that emitted pale emerald gleams along polished beveled edges. Walking on this glass gave me vertigo, but once I started reading, I'd slump to the cold, translucent blocks and drift on ice floes into dense clouds. The smell of yellowing paper engulfed me. An unglued page slid out of a volume and a corner broke off shattered. I was destroying public property. Downstairs, someone harangued the librarian. Shadowy throngs of individual opera-goers coalesced and set forward in their see-through finery to look and listen. I was reading the bilingual libretto of Le Bohème, the alternating columns of incomprehensible Italian, which I could skip, made the pages speed by as did the couple's farewell in the snow, the ecstatic reconciliation. Poor little Mimi's prolonged dying. I glanced up and saw a pair of shoes cross the glass above, silently accompanied by the paling and darkening circle of the rubber end of a cane. The great eye of the library was blurred by tears. Across the street, the father of a friend of mine ran a bookstore. As I entered it, I was almost knocked down by two men coming out. One of them touched my shoulder and drew me aside. He had a 3 days' growth of beard on his cheeks, shiny white canines, a rumpled raincoat of fashionable cut that clung to his hip, and he was saying, "Don't just rush by without saying hello." Here he was at last. But now I knew for sure I wasn't worthy. I was ugly with my sissy ways and the mole he'd find between my shoulder blades. "Do I know you?" I asked. I felt I did, as if we'd traveled for a month and a train compartment knee to knee, night after night, via the 30 installments of a serial but plotless, though highly emotional dream. I smiled, embarrassed by the way I looked. "Sure you know me," he laughed, and his friend, I think, smiled. "No, honestly, what's your name?" I told him. He repeated it, smiled suppressed as I'd seen men on the make condescend to women they were sizing up. "We just blew into town," he said. "Hope you can make us feel at home." He put an arm around my waist and I shrank back. The sidewalks were crowded with people staring at us curiously. His fingers fit neatly into the space between my pelvis and the lowest rib, a space that welcomed him, that had been cast from the mold of his hand. I kept thinking, these two guys want my money, but how they planned to get it remained vague. And I was alarmed they'd been able to tell at a glance that I was the very one who would respond to their advances so readily. I was so pleased the handsome stranger had chosen me because he was from out of town. He had higher, different standards. He thought I was like him, and perhaps I was, or soon would be. Now that raffish man, younger and more handsome than I'd imagined, but also dirtier and more condescending, had materialized before me. I wasn't at all sure what I should do. My reveries hadn't been that detailed, nor had I anticipated meeting someone to cross-hatched with ambiguity, a dandy who hadn't bathed, a penniless seducer, someone upon whose face passion and cruelty had cast a grill of shadows. I was alarmed. I ended up by keeping my address secret, midnight robbery, but agreeing to meet him at the pool in the amusement park the next day at noon. An appointment I didn't keep, though I felt the hour come and go like a king in disguise turned away at the peasant's door. The books in the bookstore shimmered before my eyes as I worked through a pile of them with their brightly colored paper jackets, bearing photographs of pensive, well-coiffed women and middle-aged men in Irish knit sweaters with pipes and profiles. Because I knew these books were by living writers. I looked down on them. My head was still ringing with the full bravado performance of history in the library, opera house. Those old books either had never owned or had lost their wrappers. The likeness of their unpictured authors had been recreated within the brown, brittle pages. But these living writers, life struck me as an enfeeblement, a proof of dimmed vitality when compared to the energetic composure of the dead whose busts, all carved beards and sightless, protuberant eyes, I imagined, filling the empty niches above the opera doors under a portico, which was now home to sleeping bums and stray cats, but once the splendid approach across diamonds of black and white marble pavement to black and gilt doors opening the brilliant assembly, the fans and the diamonds and the magic fire circling the sleeping woman. At home, I heard the mute strains of discordant music. One night, my stepmother, hard and purposeful, drove back downtown unexpectedly to my father's office after midnight. Still later, I could hear her shouting in her wing of the house. I hid behind a door and listened to my father's patient, explaining drone. The next morning, Alice, my colleague, broke down, wept, locked herself in the ladies' room. When she came out, her eyes, usually so lovely and unfocused, narrowed with spite and pain as she muttered a stream of filth about my stepmother and my father. He tried to lure her to one of those Fleabag hotels. On the following morning, I learned she'd been let go, though by that time I knew how to get the endless maulings out of my own. She'd been let go? Into what? That man's embrace around the waist set me spinning like a dancer across the darkened stage of the city. My turns led me to Fountain Square, the center. After nightfall, the downtown was nearly empty. A cab might cruise by. One high office window might glow. The restaurants had closed by 8, but a bar door could swing open to impose on me the silhouette of a man. Shabby city of black stone, whited by starlings, poor earthy progeny of the mystic metal dove, poised on the outstretched wrist of the goddess of the fountain. I'm going to move forward a little bit so we can get to the root. Okay, here we go. There was something of a cold and firm and well-spoken about me. The clipped tones of a businessman's defeating the farmer's hoaxing yarn that the man dropped his chin into his palm and thought, "What's today?" he asked at last. "Saturday." I myself taking the Greyhound to New York's Tuesday morning, he said. "Want to go?" I said, "Sure." He told me that if I bring him $40 on Monday evening, he'd buy me my ticket. He asked me where I lived, and I told him. His willingness to help me made me trust him. Without ever explicitly being taught such things, I'd learned by studying my father that at certain crucial moments, an emergency and opportunity, one must act first and think later. One must suppress minor inner objections and put off feelings of cowardice or confusion and turn oneself into a simple instrument of action. I'd seen my father become calm when he'd taken Blanche's daughter to the hospital. I'd also watched him feel his way blindly with nods, smiles, and monosyllables toward the shadowy opening of a hugely promising but still vague business meal. And with women, he was ever alert to adventure. The gauzy transit of a laugh across his path, a minor whirlpool in the sluggish flow of talk, the faintest whiff of seduction. I too wanted to be a man of the world and dare not question my new friend too closely. For instance, I knew a train ticket could be bought at the last moment, even on board, but I was willing to assume either that the bus ticket had to be secured in advance or that at least he thought it did. Rearranged a time to meet on Monday when I could hand over the money. I had it at home squirreled away in the secret compartment of a wood tray I made the previous year in the shop. Oh, I love it. There's a streetcar outside of my house. Then on Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., he'd meet me at the corner near, but not inside of my house. He'd have his brother's car, and we'd proceed quickly to the 6:45 bus bound east. A long haul to New York, he said, or say 20 hours. No, make that 21. And in New York? I asked timidly, not wanting to seem helpless and scare him off, but worried about my future. Would I be able to find work? I was only 16, I said, adding 2 years to my age. Could a 16-year-old work legally in New York? If so, doing what? Waiter, he said. A whole hog heaven of restaurants in New York City. Sunday, it rained in a hot drizzle all day, and in the west, the sky lit up a bright yellow that seemed more than the smell of sulfur than a color. I played the piano with the silencer on lest I wakened my father. I was bidding the instrument farewell. If only I'd practiced, I might have supported myself as a cocktail pianist. I improvised my impression of sophisticated tinkling with disappointing results. As I took an hour-long bath, periodically emptying an inch of cold water and replacing it with warm, I thought my way out again through the routine, greeting the guests, taking their order, serving pats of butter, beverages, calling out my request to the chef. My long, flat feet under the water twitched sympathetically as I raced down the restaurant. If only I'd observed waiters all those time. Well, I coasted on charm. As for love, that too, I'd win through charm. Although I know I hadn't charmed anyone since I was 6 or 7, I consoled myself by deciding people out here were not susceptible to the petty larceny of a beguiling manner. They responded only to character, accomplishments, the slow accumulation of will rather than sudden millinery devisings of fantasy. In New York, I'd be the darling boy again. In that Balzac novel, a penniless young man had made his fortune on luck, looks, winning ways. New Yorkers, like Parisians, I hoped and feared would know what to make of me. I carried the plots and atmosphere of fiction about with me and tried to cram random events into those ready molds, but truthfully, the relationship was more reciprocal, less rigorous. Life sang art songs, but art also took the noise life gave and picked it out as a tune. The Cocktail Pianist. Oh, New Orleans, I love it. The Cocktail Pianist obliging the humming drunk. Before it closed, I walked down to a neighborhood pharmacy and bought a bottle of peroxide. I had decided to bleach. There's a whole party. I had decided to bleach my hair late Monday night on Tuesday. I no longer answered the description my father would put out in his frantic search for me. Perhaps I'd affect an English accent as well. I'd coached with the Emerald City Players and my stepmother in the part of Lady Bracknell before she performed the role with the Emerald City Players. I could now say cucumber sandwiches with the scarcely a vowel after the initial fluty U. As an English blonde, I evade not only my family, but also myself and emerge as this energetic and lovable boy I long to be. Not exactly a boy, more a girl, or rather a sturdy, canny, lavishly devout tomboy like Joan of Arc, tough in battle but yielding before her visionary father. I wouldn't pack winter clothes. Surely by October I'd be able to buy something warm. A new spurt of hot water as I retraced my steps to the kitchen, clipped the order to the cook's wire, or flew out the swing door smiling, acted courageously, and won the miraculously large tip. And there, seated at the corner table by himself, is the English lord, silver-haired, recently bereaved. My hands trembled as I give him the frosted glass. In my mind, I'd already betrayed the hillbilly with the sideburns who sobbed their dignity as I delivered my long farewell speech. He wasn't intelligent or rich enough to suit me. When I met him on Monday at 6 beside the fountain and presented him with the four $10 bills, he struck me as an ominously indifferent to the details of tomorrow's adventure, which I'd elaborate with such fanaticism. He reassured me about the waiter's job and my ability to do it, told me again where he'd pick me up in the morning, but smiling dissuaded me from peroxiding my hair tonight. Just pack it. We'll bleach you white when we get where we're going. We had a hamburger together at the Grasshopper, a restaurant of 2 rooms, one brightly lit and filled with booths and families and waitresses wearing German peasant costumes and white lace hats. The other murky and smelling of beer and smoke, a man's world, the bar. I went through the bar to the toilet. When I came out, I saw Alice, the woman I'd worked with, in a low-cut dress, skirted hiked high to expose her knee. Hand over her pearl necklace, her hair had been restyled. She pushed one lock back and let it fall again over her eyes. The Veronica a cape might pass before an outraged bull. The man beside her, who now placed a grimy hand on her knee, she let out a shriek, a coquette shriek, I suppose, but edged with terror. I was glad she didn't see me, since I felt ashamed of the way our father had treated her. I planned not to sleep at all, but had set the alarm should I doze off for hours. I lay in the dark and listened to the dogs barking down in the valley. Now that I was leaving this house forever, I was tiptoeing through it mentally and prizing its luxuries. The shelves lined with blocks of identical cans. My father ordered everything by the gross. The linen cupboard stacked high with ironed, if snuffed, specked sheets. My own bathroom with its cupboard full of soap, tissue, towels, hand towels, washcloths. The elegant helix of the front staircase descending to the living room with its deep carpet. Shading lamps and the pretty mirror bordered by tiles on which someone with a nervous touch had painted the various breeds of lapdog. This house where I'd never felt I belonged no longer belonged to me. And the future so clearly charted for me, college, career, wife, and White House wavering behind green trees, was being exchanged for their external circulating through the restaurant. My path is clear to me as chalk marks on the floor, instructions for each foot in the tangled lines that flowed together, branched and joined. In my dream, my father had died, but I refused to kiss him though next he was pulling me up on his head. In my dream, my father had died, but I refused to kiss him though next he was pulling me up onto his lap. Ungainly teen smeared with Vicks Vapor Rub and whom everyone inexplicably treated as a sick child. When I silenced the alarm, fear overtook me. I'd go hungry, the boarding house room with the toilet down the hall, blood on the linoleum, Christ in a chromo, crepe paper flowers. I dressed and packed my gym bag with the bottles of peroxide and 2 changes of clothes. Had my father gone to bed yet? Would the dog bark when I tried to slip past him? And would that man be on the corner? The boarding house room, yes. Negro music on radio next door. The coquette shriek. As I walked down the drive, I felt conspicuous under the blank windows of my father's house, and half expected him to open the never-used front door to call me back. I stood on the appointed corner. It began to drizzle, but a water truck crept past anyway, spraying the street, a darker, slicker gray. No birds were in sight, but I could hear them testing the day. A dog without a collar or a master trotted past. Two fat maids were climbing the hill, stopping every few steps to catch their breath. One, a shiny blue-black fat woman wearing a flower turban and holding a purple umbrella with a white plastic handle, was scowling and talking fast, but obviously to humorous effect, for her companion couldn't stop laughing. The bells of the Catholic school behind the dripping trees across the street marked the half hour. More and more cars were passing me. I studied every driver. Had my friend overslept? The milkman, the bread truck? Damn hillbilly, a bus went by carrying just one passenger, 7:15. He wasn't coming. When I saw him the next evening on the square, he waved at me and came over to talk. From his relaxed manner, I instantaneously saw that he duped me and I was powerless. To whom could I report him? Like a heroin addict or a communist. I was outside the law, outside it, but with him, this man, we sat side by side on the same bench. A bad muffler exploded in a volley, and the cooing starlings perched on the fountain figure's arms flew up and away, leaving behind only the metal dove. I took off my tie, rolled it up, and slipped it inside my pocket. Because I didn't complain about being betrayed, my friend said, "See those men yonder?" "Yes." "I could get you one for $8. He let that sink in. Yes, I thought. I could take someone to one of those little Fleabag hotels. "Which one do you want?" he said. I handed him the money and said, "The blonde one." And that's chapter 2. Thank you.
So thank you so much. That was spectacular. For those who I was here earlier, I'm Rakesh Satyal. I actually know Edmund well. I mean, he was actually a teacher of mine years ago when I was first studying writing, and
Yeah,
he is one of the rare writers who just over the course of his career has just gotten better and better and better, and he's still writing gorgeous books.
absolutely.
And I think it's amazing hearing that passage because I actually grew up in Cincinnati, and so like being a queer kid in Cincinnati, when I first read that book,
Mhm.
I contextualized that place, and especially Fountain Square, which I'd been to so much with my family, like through the years. And I'm curious just to know your first intersection with this book, like how you first read it and in what context.
You know, I started reading this when I found out that I got posed, strangely enough.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah. And my mentor, my college mentor, Raymond Caldwell, while I was at Howard University, I was asking him, like I wanted to think about source material when I was crafting this character and really making sure that I was staying true to period and true to the experiences, because I don't mean to sound coy or anything, but there was some things that me and Damon, specifically in the first script, rather, that didn't go to, it wasn't the production script or production draft where it was being sent out for auditions. Damon was this sex worker, this gritty young man that was kind of in this weird space of being kicked out of his home for being queer, and then going and using his body as a means to survive.
Mm-hmm.
But then I knew that he was also a young man, and so I was looking at the young man's story, or young queer stories. And I was in Mexico. I was visiting a friend of mine, and I was reading it, and I could not put it down. I think I read it in maybe three hours, because just as Paris is Burning or any type of queer narratives or queer literature, I found myself in the fabric of it, the feelings of inadequacy and the feelings of being duped specifically, and and just going through what usually what you have been conditioned in, like heteronormative spaces, more so than others, where you don't have necessarily. I didn't get a gay mentor or a mentor who was queer until when I got to college.
Right.
And so for me, it was just like I felt like I was re-energized and reintroduced to my intersections on like love and sexual prowess and just like understanding the politics of being a male, politics of just being someone specifically just is going through a whole bunch of transitions and no one to talk to about it. And Right. It's really, really beautiful. And I just felt like I learned so much about a journey and a boy's own story, essentially, in a boy's own world that was so dynamic and brilliant.
Of course, yeah. It's because I was going to ask that because it's very early on in the pilot episode of Pose where you get kicked out and you go.
Yeah. I go straight to New York, and then as I was reading it again, I was re-energized around like, yo, this is kind of the fabric of what I've experienced and the feelings and the questions that our narrator is telling us and asking, just like about this life that was mapped out, and being an artist, and me specifically, just being an artist, and knowing that sometimes in some way we kind of divert from the plan, and also being a queer artist. Right. So it's just like all of these variables. How do you create and govern your own space and your own tomorrow? And how do you provide healing that you weren't getting at home? How do you leave out the trauma that you've had to deal with for so long? And I think that for me, when I opened the first pages of the pilot script, I said, "Oh, I know exactly where this is."
Yeah, right.
And coupled with my own experiences, obviously, but just having something to center them and create type of like a visual language or imagery, being able to conjure the image was really, really impactful for me, and also to be just informed by Mr. Edmund's work, because this was my first book to read of his.
Right.
I was just like, holy shit. What is going on? I love this. Where has this been?
Oh my God, what isn't
right?
Going on?
Yes. and it's just so fascinating to me. Yeah. Go ahead.
And are you? I'm curious. Like when you talk to other cast members, did they go through similar process of exploration with those early scripts, kind of envisioning characters, and did you come together in some way to kind of figure out what those dynamics would be?
It's crazy because for all of my I guess my musical theater or theater babies on this post as well as just literature, I think they all had specific colors, right? Like everybody's
I think it froze. I'm not sure if you, for those, in case you come back, this is a different type of Frozen. This is Frozen 3. We'll see. 1 second. Let's see if we can 1 second, folks. We'll.
Woo! Okay, y'all. Listen. Make sure you charge your computers. Make sure you charge your computers while you're reading. Okay? I thought I had at least 10 more minutes left. Jesus.
Sorry.
Okay. So, no, excuse me. You should have saw how I was running around this house.
But I think about how you when you were talking about your early characters and kind of crafting that world, what sort of interactions you had with one another to envision that and bring that to life.
And to my point about, I think everybody had a certain color, right? Like everybody was. I think that with this particular story, with Pose and the culture, well, the ballroom culture of the 80s, 90s, queer culture, trans culture, I think that everyone was able to find themselves in this world that was occupying like 6 inches off the ground, right? And I think that with my character specifically, I'm not gonna lie to you, I found myself a little confused because I felt like I was Billy Crocker, to my point about with anything goes, like the young man that everything, the sponge of the experiences that are going on around him. And it was really lunar to kind of be like, wow, all right. But then we also kind of, as specifically with the draft that we got from that initial kind of audition, I realized that they had made a wider, expansive approach to what spaces everybody occupies, like what color do people occupy, and it was very fascinating. We've talked about it, we've went through it, me and my castmates, and we've kind of like also been like, yo, that was inspiration of this person, and specifically with, oh wow, oh I see Freddie Pendarvis in that, or just having people that. And also our ballroom consultants, so are there to like help us move the story forward and actually a part of the work. And then I'm like, wait, I'm bringing information from you, and I'm seeing you in front of me. So it was kind of meta. It was like, okay, I'm in art, and I'm seeing in front of me. So what is happening? So just like this particular book, and many other books. I know the Stonewall riots, kind of like. Dossier that he has or he's created as far as the history is concerned. We all just kind of dived in, had a few like gathering kind of culminating of the minds moments to really just kind of inject into who these people are. So
that's great. I mentioned to you, I think earlier, that I, work with your wonderful colleague, Janet Mock. I edit Janet, and she is
my other Pisces. We're both Pisces. So she's giving me hope that my book, if I just, keep it true and have you as like on my team, it'll be great. Both of them.
She's amazing. And I think, one of the things I love, what we talk about a lot with Lambda is this idea that, as you've just spoken to with your reading, people find themselves in books. And what I love so much about her, she's such a beautiful writer, but she's known who she was, her whole life. She knew such a decisive person. And so, and there's such passion and intelligence in her experience. And I think, I was curious to hear about, I work with her in one capacity, but what working with her on the show is like, because it's just amazing that she went into a completely different medium from what she had done before. And look how gorgeous the show is. That must have been such a new territory. And I'm just curious to know how the two of you work together, how that is all like.
I think with Janet, what makes her so incredible is the fact that she is so amazing at being a visionary, knowing how to decipher and to accomplish action items, but then also be sensitive enough to know what the energy, color, and then the tone and everything. She's such a dynamic individual. I come to her in so much of times of needing advice and how to deal with just going through a transition and of like just going from like Howard or Moment to like visibility, uber visibility, right? And I think that she handles it such with grace and such with style that I was very, very excited to work with her. I read all the books before I knew where I was like, okay, girl, let me see what's going on. Who am I about to get in the ring with? And I think that she is such a dynamic and visionary and creator, and I'm so excited to work with her. But the transition for me, I know, was more so rooted in just being integral with Damon's voice, injecting him with the complexities of what it means to be a normal teenager, but having extraordinary circumstances happen on your person. And I think that with anybody of the LGBTQIA+ community, choosing your truth over your safety, actually also put you in a place to do the same thing that I was just talking about.
Right. Of course.
Not really. You are taking a big step that a lot of people haven't yet taken, and in and of itself, that is power. So I think that when you are coupled with someone else that is so incredibly centered in who they are, and I've been like that all my life, as well. So it's just like, okay, great. Now we can actually have a real conversation because I'm talking to someone that knows themselves,
That's it. Yeah.
And that is incredibly gratifying, and I'm so humbled to be lined up with a project and a piece of work, a masterpiece, where it's so close to my own politics within myself,
Right.
But then also knowing that with Janet, to keep her as a subject, I'm not governed by my circumstances of who I am. I'm not governed by them. I can do more. I'm just excellent. I'm not just this type of excellent writer or this type of excellent director, producer. I am just excellent. And I think that when you take a very specific story of a specific subject, if they are excellent or if it is excellent, you can illuminate a universal truth. So that for me has been the incredible task while working with all of my castmates, is just to shop and morph as much of what I can get from them and be like, okay, now it's mine. Now I can get that from you and then write that out and, figure that out. So with her specifically, it's her vision, her connectedness to patience and purpose, and just being like having an infectious spirit and laugh. And
Absolutely. That's so incredible. Well, beautifully said. I think just before we end, I want to ask a couple of questions we got from people. So one is, I know this is a question you probably get often, talk about what you can talk about, but what projects are you working on besides Pose right now?
Okay. So how can I can talk about the stuff that I'm doing, like producing and stuff. Well, I'm in New Orleans right now shooting a short film, or rather about to produce and direct and star in it, where it's about Juneteenth. What does Black joy look like? In 2020 in the pandemic. Also, I'm writing my book, which is like, okay, well, it's kind of autobiographical around just a teenage young man during the killing, or during the summer where Trayvon Martin was killed, and growing up in the South, and what those intersections, Black, queer, male, what does it look like on that body at that time and then moment, but then also engaging it with some type of like into the future or Afrofuturism, because I find that with this book specifically, and with what we're dealing with right now with this pandemic and also with this, racial and civil unrest, is the fact that we can have another relationship with escapism, right? Like escaping Afrofuturism or science fiction or just literature that is going to move you forward in a way that you can create hope and innovation and engage imagination. That I think that we need more now than ever, just across the board, where we can see a new normal and feel something, even just the immediacy of the complications of what our unnamed narrator is going through, with just like, what does that next level look like? I'm really, really intrigued and excited and invigorated with just making a story that does both and. One side of it is autobiographical, but another part of it is turning it all on its head and just putting us in a new way, in a new wave. So, I'm in here just trying to like do as much as possible to make that work. Plus, I'm just, auditioning. Maybe got some few projects that I can't talk about, but that's pretty much it.
Well, you're being excellent. See, but I think I love hearing you say that, because I think people thought in the past few years it was going to be escapism or realism, like this idea of like this dichotomy between the two, when in fact the kind of merging of the two creatively allows you a space to do something completely different, which I think
do something completely different.
Well, I think we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for a stunning reading, and everybody watch Pose. It is so damn good. And and just to remind everybody, please donate to Lambda Literary. We have more events coming up. Go to lambdaliterary.org. You can use the donate button at the bottom of the screen. We're trying to raise money this month with the pandemic to like help our writers in schools programs, our writers retreat, eventually the Lambda Awards. So thank you so much, Ryan, for doing this.
Thank you so very much.
and have a good evening.
You too.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye.